Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Let's Do Lunch. Ned Sherman was not able to join us today, so I'm filling in for him. I'm Paul Sweeting. I'm the co-founder of the RightsTech project, along with Ned and Tinzar. We cover here at, as I'm sure you know, here at Let's Do Lunch, we cover the business of streaming, the business of games, the business of music, and the future of entertainment. And of course, this being Thursday, it's our RightsTech Roundtable Day. So welcome to the RightsTech Roundtable. Before we get started, a few housekeeping items. We invite you to open up the chat window by clicking the chat icon at the bottom of the screen, and feel free to introduce yourself to folks, drop in your connection information if you wish, and we encourage people to participate throughout the session in the chat room, and it's a good way to make connections with other folks out there. Also, if you have questions for the panel during the session, please put them in the Q&A queue, which you can open by clicking that icon at the bottom of the screen. It's just easier for me or the panelists to spot them in there than to try to pick them out from inside the running chat stream. So with that, let's get on with today's RightsTech session. And as usual, there are a couple of headlines I wanted to call everyone's attention to, just because I think they're interesting developments in the world of RightsTech. First of all, there's been a fair amount of movement, or at least activity, recently in the area of legislation that would require, encourage, urge, enable digital platforms, DSPs, and user-generated platforms, Facebook, Google, to negotiate with news publishers and to potentially pay news publishers for including the publisher's content on those platforms. This is something that got its start in Australia, where the Australian government mandated a negotiation toward a settlement, or face the government imposing a settlement that would compel platforms to pay publishers for repurposing their news. And it was a component of the European Union's copyright directive, technically the directive on copyright in the digital single market. It hasn't been, that directive is still in the process of being implemented at the member country level. But there have been steps taken in some countries. France, I think Italy just recently did something along these lines to again require that platform providers negotiate with and pay, or at least license on some terms, the use of news publishers' content. There was a bill introduced last year. Well, actually, it's been kicking around. It was reintroduced last year in the U.S. Called the Journalism Protection and Journalism Protection and Competition Act, JPCA. And it's been kind of bubbling along on Capitol Hill. It hasn't really gotten any hearings yet. It's gotten hearings. It hasn't it hasn't come up for any votes yet, either at the full body level or at the committee level. But recently there's been some further activity around that. There have been some changes made to the bill, including the introduction of baseball-style arbitration in the event that publishers and platforms are unable to come to an agreement between themselves. Baseball arbitration being, it's called that because it's modeled on the collective bargaining agreement in Major League Baseball, where there's a dispute between a player and a salary dispute between a player and a team, and they are unable to resolve their differences. An arbiter gets involved, and the arbiter has to pick one proposal or the other. It can't, they can't, split the difference or suggest any further changes. They either have to choose the team's best and final offer or the player's best and final offer. And there has been some movement toward adopting that sort of a settlement, a mandatory baseball-style arbitration in the JCPA. And this bill has had some bipartisan support. It has sponsors on both sides of the aisle, and there appears to be some momentum building behind it. So keep an eye on that. At the same time, the Trudeau government in Canada just introduced a bill that would also require payment by platforms to news publishers. That bill, it's only just been introduced. It's only had its first reading. There's a long process before that could ever actually become law, but it's another example of national governments following the lead set by the Australian government. So that's worth keeping an eye on. The other big headline that caught my eye this week was that the big three record labels have filed a emergency motion with the Copyright Royalty Board in response to the CRB's rejection of a deal reached between the labels and the National Music Publishers Association, along with the Nashville Songwriters Association, to fix the rate, the mechanical royalty rate at 9.1 cents. This was controversial at the time, and it's very unusual for the CRB to do that. In its emergency, in their emergency petition, the labels argue that the CRB doesn't actually have the authority to do that on any sort of blanket basis, that all it could do is exempt any named plaintiff in the original complaint from the terms of the agreement. And as it turns out, there was only a single named plaintiff in the original complaint, the songwriter George Johnson. So the labels are arguing that, or asking that CRB clarify exactly what it has done here and make it clear that at least as far as the labels are concerned, the rejection of the agreement applies only to songs written by George Johnson and not to anybody else. And they claim that this, the CRB's action does not mean that the whole mechanical royalty rate procedure has to be relitigated, that the CRB doesn't have the authority to just rescind the agreement that was reached between the labels and the publishers as far as the broad music industry is concerned. So who knows what's going to come of that. I'm not even sure how that would get adjudicated, but it's certainly worth keeping an eye on. So speaking of music royalties and rights, we have, I think, a very interesting discussion lined up for today with a couple of entrepreneurs who are working on a rights management approach for the music and arts industry using blockchain technology. And I'd like to invite Brian and Tim to join us if your guys are out there. There is Tim.
Hi, Paul.
And there is Brian. Brian Scudder is he's actually the deputy director of the British Blockchain Association. He's also a longtime communications executive working in both government and the private sector. He has a background in trade journalism, which is interesting. I have a background in trade journalism, although his sounds a bit more exciting than mine. He actually spent nearly 20 years in the Middle East, writing where he launched, I think, a business publication there, an English language business publication in the Gulf, in the Persian Gulf. That was, more interesting than my sort of pedestrian work here in the U.S., mostly in the media and entertainment industries. But Brian is also the head of communications at Blockpool.io, which is a business-to-business blockchain platform that is being used by folks to develop rights management applications using blockchain for primarily the music, though also the arts world. And also joining us is Tim Shank. He is the Chief Technology Officer of Blockpool. And he has a long background in technology, in the technology business. He's been a strategist and entrepreneur in that for several decades. I won't embarrass him by saying how long he has. It's listed here in his bio, but he's a highly experienced technology executive, and both he and Brian have recently been focused on the cryptocurrency blockchain space. So welcome, gentlemen. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Paul.
Brian joins us from London, and Tim is joining us from Minnesota. So it's an Anglo-American affair here today, and in fact, Blockpool is a UK American-based company. So I don't care which of you wants to start, but tell us, what is Blockpool? Why did it start? What are you trying to do?
I can field that. Blockpool was started in 2016, 2017. It was actually the founders of Blockpool were actually the first music-centric blockchain. They created that's audio coin. From the success of audio coin, the founders decided to build Blockpool, which is focusing on the real world benefits of blockchain, always trying to stay clear of the hype and all of the noise that's around blockchain to focus on what really matters and the true values of blockchain. So we focus on art and media, but the solutions, they apply broadly. I mean, the rights management is rights management, asset management is asset management. It can, in many ways, be treated the same, especially for some of the systematic problems we see in music. Another thing we've done at Blockpool is we've productized it, or we've essentially modeled our business as blockchain as a service. So we can deploy a blockchain in the space of a week or even a couple of days if we escalate that, and for a fraction of the cost, because we're not redeveloping the same blockchain over and over. We're not using new developers. We have the products, and the blockchain that technology that we use. It's a delegated proof-of-stake system. We've added a number of features specifically added to address concerns in the music industry, and we can talk about those. But they are unique in blockchain in some cases that just really take the lid off of what blockchain can do in certain areas.
Such as
fractionalizing assets. So blockchain has the capability to record assets, and most blockchain technologies have the ability to nowadays use NFTs. We see common NFTs representing an asset that it's a digital piece of artwork, but that can be applied to anything. What many blockchains do not do is allow for associations of what we call shares tokens for our purposes. Initially developed for the music and fine arts, we can allow a creator to generate 100 or could be 1,000 shares tokens is what is the terminology we use, but they each represent a percentage or a fraction of a percentage of the ownership of that art. And in some cases, in other cases, they can represent the royalties that are due to various people. So while the NFT asset can be a registration of the actual ownership or the creation, many people can be partial owners or can be partially entitled to the funds that come from the rights to use that.
So if I were a music artist who wanted to allow my fans to own a piece of a fractional piece of, if not the rights themselves, then the royalties that are generated by it, that's something that you guys would be able to enable through your system.
Absolutely. And there are other use cases for that. For instance, if I'm an artist and I want to release an album, I can pre-sell those shares tokens to crowdsource and fund my studio time, whatever it is I might need for my project. By pre-selling those tokens, which then come with a promise of future revenue for the people who have invested in it. And there's so many use cases for something like this across industries. So that's just one example.
So, at least based on your bios, neither of you guys have much in the way of a background in the entertainment and media industries, apart from your background as a journalist, Brian. Why focus there?
That's a very fair question. The other partners in the business do have that background, and that's really why the sort of business has gone in this direction. My particular interest is, it's funny you should mention the sort of regulatory approach in various governments, because that's certainly happening in the UK. So my interest is very much in the kind of the future proofing of businesses and how one applies technology to make sure that in this instance, rights management it can be conducted in the metaverse, can be conducted in Web 3.0. So I come from a sort of, I was in the Middle East for 20 years, but I've also been writing about future tech for 10. So my particular interest is in that. And I think working with Blockpool it has really allowed me to get under the hood of a lot of the sort of the NFT craze and to understand how that actually affects the real world rather than the flash in the pan that I think we're seeing at the moment. But as I say, the other partners in the business of 3 decades, 4 decades business experience in music. So that's the kind of pedigree there.
I see. So maybe we should circle back and talk about the actual genesis of Blockpool. How long has it been around? When did it launch?
2016, in September of 2016, I believe, was the official launch.
And you guys got involved from the very beginning, or?
I was involved with the project as a consumer and investor because of the lack of hype, because that's from the very beginning, that's been the focus of Blockpool. Through my involvement with the community and the company, I've found that I can make a pretty substantial contribution. And so I've been involved from the beginning, but not as part of the company. That came about a year later.
Right.
I've been involved for 6 months, so it's relatively new for me. They're really exciting. It's a really exciting space to be in. And if you go to, I've been going to a lot of the sort of blockchain. I mean, luckily we opened up in the UK pretty early and compared with some places. So I've been able to go to a lot of conferences, NFT conferences, blockchain conferences in the UK, and a lot of people are talking about NFTs, but also NFTs in relation to rights management. There's obviously a lot of confusion there, but if you add the sort of the groundswell of individuals, organizations developing new protocols and new methodologies of how to approach digital assets as a whole, and you add the regulatory changes that are going on in government, certainly in the UK, and as you said, in other places, I think that's starting to become a bit of a pointy end. And that I find absolutely fascinating. We are starting to see the beginnings of what the future might look like, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting. Blockchain, there was, as Tim mentioned, a lot of hype around it back in 2015, 2016. It was going to completely revolutionize the music business, among many others. A lot of those early efforts, let's say, did not pan out as planned. And blockchain sort of fell into some degree of disrepute, in that nobody wanted to talk about it anymore. It stopped being the number one topic at industry conferences and so forth, because I guess enough people had gotten burned that they didn't want to go back to that hot stove. But lately, with all the interest around NFTs and Web3, whatever that actually is, I mean, it seems like I've seen some people comment that what Web3 really is a rebranding of blockchain, in that it envisions a web built on distributed protocols.
It's decentralized, exactly.
Decentralized
protocols.
That's
both organizationally and technologically. So, and there's a big distinction to make between that and the metaverse, the various flavors of metaverse that exist, and that is a rebranding of current technologies and current organizations. Whereas I think Web3 is actually a different thing. But I'm not sure that the Gartner hype cycle kind of quite applies appropriately anymore to blockchain, in that if you think, yes, there was that classic sort of hype, and then the fall from grace, and then slowly pick up to mass adoption, which tends to be the cycle. But NFTs have suddenly exploded right in the middle of that and changed the approach, and it's certainly changed interest at government level and at sort of mass level. So I think there's been an acceleration in terms of, you can call it blockchain, you can call it Web3, whatever you want, however you want to define it, but certainly in terms of the popular imagination, it has really, really caught on. And the fact that there now are real use cases that enable some of this Web3 stuff to happen, and where it's applied in the metaverse, or metaverses can also be applied there. I think we've reached a point now where, in some ways, it doesn't actually matter so much if part of the previous past blockchain has been sort of disparaged and quite rightfully in most cases disappeared into history, because I think now there's so much interest from so many people around the world that if governments like the UK and the American government are listening, from the city of London all the way down to mass communities of people, almost tribes, if you like, the kind of the new kind of brand is effectively a tribe brand. That is something that I think everyone in business should listen to, and not worry so much about where we're in the hype cycle and is some of this technology scammy or whatever, because we're almost beyond that, and we're beyond that in almost like the zeitgeist. I think it's no longer become just as straightforward as does the technology work. It's a lot of people around the world saying we want a replacement for what we have. We think it's going to be blockchain, and that's an opportunity. That's a business opportunity for people, I think.
And what about investors? Are they has their perspective evolved?
No, very much. I met a young man at the Cambridge Applied Blockchain Conference a couple of weeks ago, and of course, he turned to me and said, "Well, of course, it's so easy to get investment in blockchain now," and he must be 20. They had to go from Arve there, who made his first $1 billion before he finished his PhD. And they're actively seeking to award grants to blockchain businesses. So, there is serious investment capability out there. There are a very large number of VC funds, for example, that are specializing in it. It's a question of catching the wave, I think. But that's from an IP management perspective. I think this is really the whole issue of blockchain and Web3 and the metaverse is, where do businesses position themselves for what is going to happen? A lot of the technology it's all in its infancy. We all know that. But I think if you take the weight of the communities that are involved, one can call them fan bases if one likes. You can think of fan bases for songwriters, for producers, for bands, for whatever the artists are, the creators. Blockchain is almost by its nature of being decentralized, it's creating really powerful movements of people who want to know more about that individual artist or that band or that producer. If that interest is going to be expressed in the future, in the very near future, online, in a metaverse, no matter what flavor that is, or through decentralized organizations, businesses need to start thinking about that as where are they going to start looking, at least, if not sinking their money into it. That's what I think, that we've reached an important point in history now to start to do that.
So let's talk about some real world cases. You recently announced a deal with Family and Music, for instance, to support a rights management and tracking service that they are launching, I think, this spring, correctly. And obviously they're not here. I don't want you to necessarily speak for them, but what can you tell us about that deal? And in particular, what is your role in that project, that initiative?
Tim, do you want to do the functional side?
Yeah, I got that. Yeah. The Family Music, they have a pretty broad platform for music business for independent musicians to embrace the business side. So our part of it is we provided the blockchain backend for their rights management. And what they're doing with that is they are logging creation at the point of creation. It can be multiple creators, and logging that future. I can't speak to the future stages of their platform without them, of course. But there will be some developments in the coming months and years that do everything we've been talking about here, that are able to manage the rights, able to track the ownership, able to allow for artists to get paid directly for the work that they do.
So when you say you provide the backbone for that, what is actually happening there? Are they, how is that being actually executed on a technical basis? Through an API, through?
Yeah, that's exactly it. So we have, as I mentioned, blockchain as a service. So we don't do decentralized blockchains. They are centralized for the added control. And the lack of things, lack of regulation around currencies, and you get into a very big legal can of worms when you start getting into a currency or a security. So we provide the blockchain backend, and it's accessed through the API. We've worked very diligently to make our blockchain as easy to integrate with any system that you might already have. It's a JSON API, RESTful API. So anything that can happen on the blockchain can be just plugged into any button or link on any other platform to trigger the addition of NFTs or the move tokens from one address to another.
So the user of that application may not even be aware that that they're engaging with the blockchain.
Yeah, and that's actually fairly important, because being such a new technology and people coming in so blind to it in a lot of cases, to have to go through that level of training, just to help them just for them to understand something that functions without their knowledge. That's kind of an important point. And one of the things that we do at Blockpool is we make sure that the blockchain is accessible. We talk about the features rather than the technology in most cases, because people don't necessarily care about the things that I tend to go off the rails on calls into the technology. People's eyes tend to glaze over, unless you're talking to a specific type of person that is very interested in learning more about
how you're doing it, not the what you're doing.
Right.
But most people just care about what you're doing, not how you're doing.
The interesting thing about Fame, I find, is that what they've done is they've taken our blockchain backbone and they've wrapped around a whole series of very much Web 2, very much traditional, KYC, ALM, audio fingerprinting, other, scanning against other databases, global databases of music rights and so on and so forth. And they've wrapped that around our blockchain. So they've been able to create a user journey that appears, well, it is seamless, relatively seamless, but it takes all the good from Web 2 and the good from traditional know your customer stuff, but actually using the blockchain to provide that kind of the motive force through that process, and make sure that when a piece of music is put onto the chain, that the provenance is absolutely immutable, that the ownership credentials are absolutely true. And the way that Tim can describe it perhaps at length another time, but the way our system works is we actually have two NFTs that talk to each other, that cement ownership, provenance, and the transfer of ownership, and smart contracts, but it just makes it basically bomb-proof, and that's why we're really pleased that Family Music have used us, because it's really showing the best of our chain and the best of the kind of functionality that chain has.
So where do you see yourselves fitting within the broader music ecosystem or the broader music industry? I mean, there are a number of efforts, varying degrees of comprehensiveness, to organize ownership data around music. There's the Mechanical Licensing Collective here in this country, which was created by the Music Modernization Act. Of course, in the UK, PRS has done a lot of work in that area, and organizations like ICE, which is a sort of multi-territory initiative in Europe. There are a lot of people working on this problem. Are you integrating, or do you have an interest in integrating with any of those other?
Definitely. I mean, we're talking to some larger, much larger organizations around the world. We're talking to labels. We're talking to. We see ourselves as being able to provide a service that provides the immutable creation, ownership of that creation on a chain, and being able to place that, if you think of the pipeline of music rights management, then placing it sort of pre PRO, pre DPS, pre PRO, so that they then have the opportunity to look back on a data file that cannot be tampered with and proves who the creator is. I think that's that's a really important part of the piece. So we're open to discussions and are having discussions with multiple potential partners on that basis. So
you're agnostic as to who does this, or
absolutely, yeah.
Under whose jurisdiction.
It's not about taking sides, it's about providing the immutable nature of the creation of proof. That's where we are the stamp, the stamp of authenticity, if you like, and providing that is taken into a system that wants to continue with that, continue the veracity of that stamp, then we're all ears. That's the way. Yes.
So just a reminder to folks, if you have questions for Tim or Brian, please put them in the Q&A, and we'll try to get to them at the end here. So you focus a lot on, and in this conversation, we've focused a lot on music. Are you thinking about other sort of adjacent verticals, as it were? I mean, for instance, the movie and television space has gotten much more complicated with the advent of streaming and tracking rights and permissions across multiple territories with multiple platforms. I mean, they're also wrestling with it. It's maybe not quite as FUBAR as the music industry, but it's orders of magnitude more complicated than it used to be.
And you have TikTok, you have
TikTok.
So we're starting to work with a business that is looking at sync film, but basically sort of placing that in the TikTok world. So that could be huge. Again, these are. I mean, we're in a fairly complex space, so these things do take time. But that's particularly interesting if we can help them achieve revenue through syncing through some of the social media platforms. That would be extraordinary. Because again, it's a bit like the black box situation where this music's just disappearing into people's feeds and never to be seen again, other than by 50 million people in Latin America. And our technology can be applied to that as much as it can be applied to the music industry in its sort of purer form. Film rights, we're looking at art, NFTs as well, and again the extension there for labels, as an example, will be merch, cover art. Again, it brings me back to the whole idea of community. What we are a part of and can enable is basically bringing fans closer to the thing that they want, which is to be closer to the artist that they love. We're in discussions with football clubs as well in the same sort of vein. We have a ticketing function, which Tim, I'm sure, can tell us about in a bit. We're lucky in the sense it's a very sophisticated chain, but it's tricky in the sense that it's such a wide potential audience of commercial audience that we're trying to sort of be quite narrow band in terms of where we want to direct ourselves and the people we want to do business with. If we had limitless funds and we're a Microsoft, then we could, or an Amazon perhaps more appropriately, that we could take all of the markets. But
I vote world enough and time. Yeah.
Exactly. We're focusing really on it's been music first. We're now extending that into the art world. We have a deal with a chemical manufacturer in Scandinavia. We're applying to chemical formulae. So again, we could end up spending the whole time talking about chemicals, petrochemicals or whatever. But
let's not.
Yeah, let's not. Because of the, as I say, it might not necessarily be myself and Tim, although I think we've got the kind of sense of what's coming pretty well defined in our minds. Because of the provenance of the people who set up the business, it is music and it's art at the moment. So yeah, and that's big enough for me, frankly.
So, one of the main big challenges, certainly in the music industry, is that the data on ownership is not complete, and it's often, there are often conflicts between different data sets. Different spellings, different, and it adds a level of complexity to it. Some people have talked about, using blockchain as a way of sort of reconciling discrepancies, or at least some discrepancies in the data. Is that an area of focus for you guys?
Well, I wouldn't
Or
call
does
it an
that
area
depend
of
on
focus.
whoever's developing the application to do it? And
The capability is absolutely there, because blockchain, the main value of blockchain, it's immutable. Once something is written to the blockchain, you know what it is, when it was written, and who wrote it. So that gives you a point in time that you can measure against the first mention of anything, to see if that was the first mention of, for instance, a song or an album. So absolutely, the capability is there. It's built into blockchain itself, if used in the proper way for that use. So I wouldn't say it's a focus. I would say that is an out-of-the-box functionality that is present absolutely in everything we do.
although, it's one thing if you're sort of collecting and recording data today at the point of creation. You have 7 decades worth of recorded music that you can't go back to the first instance because it was 50 years ago. And the chain of custody has been obscured or obliterated between now and then. So
providing it's done appropriately and with the right legal oversight, creating that, because we're not talking about the original music, and we're not talking about the original recordings, we're talking about the digital representation of those things, and that's a fundamental difference. If the British government, as we mentioned earlier, has agreed that English common law will accept smart contracts with no new legislation at all, and that they're just running a program of training judges to work out how to approach smart contracts. But if we reach the point now where digital assets can be transferred through smart contracts with perpetual rights and perpetual payments of fees according to transfers of ownership, sale effectively, that's happened. It was agreed 2 weeks ago. So we're talking about how the rights of digital objects in a digital world are manipulated and bought and sold, not necessarily the actual some sort of esoteric idea of the original music. So that I think in the digital world there has to be a point at which you start, I suppose is what I'm saying, and that time really is now. So to use a system like ours allows that start to happen. It's not tomorrow, it's not yesterday, it's now. And I think that's something that we bring. We can bring that to any digital asset. We can also bring it to physical assets. So we can use NFC technology to have shortwave. Using a mobile device that will then create an NFT of that physical object, and allows that to be traded. So there are various levels of sophistication, but I think my main point is that really, we're talking about the digital space, digital objects in the digital space for the majority of this, and that time has come, I think.
Okay, we're just about out of time. If anybody has a last minute question for Tim or Brian, please raise your hand now. Andrew Watson wants to know, is Blockpool able to provide blockchain solutions for non-crypto NFT projects? Do you have resources to assist non-technical founders with developing blockchain-enabled software?
Absolutely. We do have delivery partners for the front end if that's needed, while most companies have a preferred front end developer, website developer that they work with. We can work directly with them to integrate the blockchain itself. As I mentioned, as we talked about before, it's a JSON API, which is very easily integrated into any application that you would choose to. And we are there with the documentation. We actually customize that API to fit the use cases within that platform. So
Sorry, and also Andrew, just there's a point to make in answer to that, in that we call the kind of methodology of our blockchain NFT, the kind of tokenized element of it, NFTs, and Tim, correct me if I'm wrong, but we call them functional NFTs. So you've asked, are we able to provide blockchain solutions for non-crypto and I assume non-NFT projects? When we use the word NFT, we're actually talking about the functioning of the blockchain against whatever asset you want to manage. It's not a piece of art necessarily. It's not a piece of music necessarily. It's actually sort of integral to the way that the chain operates. So the answer is yes, we can.
And I should have noted at the top that in addition to the blockchain as a service product that we've talked about here today, Blockpool also has a consultancy part of its business where I imagine questions such as Andrew could
definitely.
Absolutely.
Okay, gentlemen, we have a late entry here. David Blundell, can you fractionalize tangible assets, not just digital assets, such as say casks of beer, for example? Well, I've fractionalized a few casks of beer, but that's another conversation.
Yeah, the answer to that is yes. What we're really talking about, and I do this all the time. There's a lot of mystification around blockchain. An NFT, it's really a unique piece of data that represents something. So it can be a keg of beer, it can be a painting on a wall, and from that you can associate and relate other tokens that do fractionalize that asset. And a case of beer, whether it's a case of beer, it could be a time shared property. Those same concepts apply broadly to any asset management, and they can always be fractionalized. And in case of a timeshare, if you had a property that was represented by an NFT, you could sell 52 tokens and have those tokens out being traded, amongst people, each one representing a week of the year. You could do it for 365 days of the year for, say, a concert venue, so there's really a very broad application of the technology itself. When you get away from the cryptocurrency and what we've seen with the NFT world, the actual nuts and bolts function can apply so broadly to so many different industries and organizations and business models that it's difficult to say no when there's a question like that asked, because you can fractionalize anything, you can track anything.
Okay, I'm afraid we have to leave it there. If anyone out there wanted to get a hold of you guys, how would they best do that?
Our website is it's currently being redeveloped, but it's blockpool.io. And we are available there. There's information about our products, there's information about our team, where we've been, and then ways to contact us.
I'm just going to stick my LinkedIn profile into the it's now in the chat.
Great. Yeah, it's now in the chat window. Okay.
Yeah.
So you can find Brian through LinkedIn, and I'm afraid we're out of time for today. Let's Do Lunch will return on Monday. There is and Tim has dropped his in there at the last minute in the chat. And there's no session tomorrow, but we'll be back. Ned will be back here on Monday to introduce Let's Do Lunch. And Monday, of course, is our Business of Streaming Day. Register now, register early, and register often. Thank you, gentlemen. This was very interesting. And
Paul, really appreciate it. Thank you for inviting us on. Really kind.
Great. Okay. Thanks so much. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.